Welcome to the second session, the story of Citibank Custodial Services Disruptive Innovation, Thailand, 1989, 1993, continues. Okay, so um, to recap, in the first session, we talked about how we moved to Thailand and how we settled down and how my boss, Bo Wilson, had an enabling environment which made it comfortable to do disruptive innovation, and how I looked at various businesses to try and find the sweet spot uh, and settled on custodial services as the area to innovate. Before I get into custodial services, I thought, I want to intersperse these stories with a few fun anecdotes, because one of the reasons I'm recording these videos is also to keep a record for my family and for my friends on something interesting that happened in Thailand. So there'll be a few fun anecdotes in each of the sessions. And there won't be too many sessions to end the story because it's a relatively simple story compared to the cash management story. So anyway, the first one was that when we moved to Thailand, for almost 2 months, we stayed in the Hilton at Nilot Park, which was a great hotel, and we really loved it. We could pretty much order whatever we liked. People knew us by name because we were long-staying guests, and we had generally had a good time. Though normally it's fairly difficult to stay in a hotel for almost 2 months while we were finding an apartment, while the apartment was getting ready and so on. So anyway, when we moved into our apartment, our son, who was 4 years at that time, he had got used to the five-star hotel life. So immediately, once we moved in, when my wife gave him breakfast, he said, "No, this is not what I want. I ordered something else for breakfast." So my wife had a hard time to try and convince him, saying that, "Hey, your days of ordering are over, and you've got to, eat what I give you. You're not in a five-star hotel anymore." So anyway, uh, as we settled down in Thailand, like Citibank, again, had this culture where we'd get together and go for offsites and have some meetings and then have some fun so that we'd have some bonding. And in Thailand, it was very common for people to give others a nickname. So my son, because for whatever reason, he was called Watermelon in Thai, which was Tengmu, if I remember right. And he didn't like people calling him Watermelon. So he'd say, "Oh, you're a tomato, you're a cucumber," and stuff like that. So anyway, and then at this offsite, we so one of the things in Thailand was this whole thing of cross-dressing. So if you were the boss, and you were male, then you had to dress up like a female and put on makeup and put on a wig and use some falsies, wear a skirt, and then sort of sing and dance or do whatever. So I had to do that, and again, my son was very upset and started crying and was quite inconsolable till I removed the makeup and was back to my normal self. So a few more stories on how for him it was quite an adjustment, but he took it really well. So in the summer we said that we'll send him to his grandparents, And we couldn't travel for a long time, but we felt that, it might be good for him to spend a couple of months with his grandparents in Delhi. So we said, okay, we're going to send you on a flight from Bangkok to Delhi alone. So he was probably 5 years old at that time. So he went as an unaccompanied minor. And we were a little concerned that, how would he take to this flight? So we asked him, are you worried? So he says, no, I'm not really worried, but I'm only one question. And that is, if the plane crashes, then should I walk towards Bangkok or should I walk towards Delhi? And finally, when he was coming back from Delhi, he said that he had got a haircut and he was very worried that we wouldn't be able to recognize. So he spent a lot of time telling us what kind of shirt he would be wearing, what kind of trousers he would be wearing, and then just so that he wouldn't forget what clothes to wear, he slept in those clothes the previous night so that when he reached the airport in Thailand, we would recognize him. Now, in Thailand, also as an expat, we met some very interesting people who were like the other expats in very many different domains. And through the Royal Bangkok Sports Club, we got to know them. And so one was a person who headed the US disbursing office. Interestingly, most of the US disbursements in Asia, the government disbursements, various grants that they gave and so on and so forth, were all channeled through Thailand. And Thailand was the center. So the person who headed the disbursement office was a person called Dick Plamundan. And with Citibank, I of course wanted to try and get the US disbursing account, which would have been a big feather in my cap if I could get it. I don't think I managed to get the account, but I got to know Dick very well. And he was married to a Bangladeshi who was also an artist, and we had a lot of fun times with them. And we haven't met them since, but if ever we go to Bangladesh, then we will probably look them up. Another person was from Minnesota, and I remember when we were chatting, he says, I've wasted half my life having all these steak and potatoes when there was such brilliant spicy Thai food which was available. So he said, if and when I go back to Minnesota, then one of the things I'm definitely going to do is not go back to steak and potatoes. So Thailand was a wonderful country. We remember visiting Koh Samui. Now it is an island which is quite commercial, but at that time it was just beginning. There was a small little airport, and the sands were white, and it was just wonderful. And Thai food was kind of amazing. But anyway, this is not really a story about all the great times that we had in Thailand. So let's come back to custodial services. So as I looked at custodial services from the lens of a customer, I found that the problem was very difficult because, when the orders were placed, sometimes the orders would get canceled, sometimes get settled. The custodial had to make sure that all the orders had been properly recorded. If they were canceled, make sure that they were canceled, then follow up to get the right number of shares. The shares used to come in very, very large numbers. They had to be counted, make sure that the shares were proper, then they had to be kept in custody. Then the shares had to be withdrawn at a time and handed back to the broker to do something called broker protect so that the dividends could be given. Then the shares had to be taken back from the broker after this broker protect. So all the corporate actions had to be monitored so that we wouldn't miss a corporate action like a rights issue or a dividend. So it was a pretty complex problem, and the volume of transactions was quite high. And the pain that the customers would have if uh, we um, messed up was quite considerable. So that was something which was nice for me, that it was a difficult problem, because if you're trying to build a disruptive business, it's quite necessary to solve a difficult problem. So once I'd done that and I had a reasonable understanding, then I called up um, the person who managed relationships with the customers that I wanted to meet in Singapore. There were quite a few customers in Singapore, and Singapore was close to Bangkok, and it was easy to get there. So when I called him up, he said, "Okay, let me find out whether these people would want to meet you if you're coming from Thailand, because remember, they invest in a number of countries and they're pretty busy people, and they are more busy in their investments and they don't necessarily have a lot of time to meet a lot of people." So initially he was a little discouraging, saying, "Look, I'll try, but I can't tell you that they'll definitely want to meet you." One day later, he said, "Can you get onto a plane as quickly as you can? Because it's amazing." When I just mentioned that, Citibank is looking at trying to do something around custodial services in Thailand, and the head of the business wants to come and meet you. They said they were delighted, and almost 7 or 8 of them were ready to give us meetings right away. So can you spend 2 days in Singapore? And so I did that, and it was like really amazing and a revelation to me that the customers had really very difficult problems with their current custodians. And they said that, "Look, we will need to be convinced that you can solve these problems. But if we are convinced, we will definitely switch to you." Now, switching custodians is a mammoth task. So the fact that they were willing to go through that pain told me that there was a lot of pain. So I was quite enthused by that trip. But then, and this is sometimes how coincidences work. So I was in the Singapore office, and the head of Citibank for that entire region, which included India, Singapore, and Indonesia. So for the whole Southeast Asia division was a person called Dennis Martin. And he knew me from my time in India. And so when he was just passing by and he saw me, and he said, "Hey, Sanjay, what are you doing here? Why don't you come and have a chat?" So he said, "What brings you to Singapore?" So then I told him that, I'm in Thailand right now, and I was looking at the custodial services business, and this is what transpired. So he says, "Do you think there's a business opportunity here? How much revenue can you make for me in a year?" So I don't remember the figure that I gave, but it was probably around $250,000 or so within a year. So he said, "Okay, that's great, because we are trying to grow our Thailand business, and this would be wonderful for us. So what would you need to make this happen?" So I said, "Well, I think we need an investment of around $250,000. So he says, "What would you need that for?" So I said, "Well, we need to develop our space properly. Uh, we need a dedicated area. We'd probably do it in the basement, because that would be close to the vault where we would keep these shares. And we need to build a really good team, spend a bit on technology, because the technology is a bit broken and we need to fix that." So he said, "Okay, how much do you think you need?" So I said, did some quick math, and probably figured we could do it for 100,000, but by being a good, aggressive executive, I said $250,000. So he said, done, right? Like, so it's approved. You can go back and tell your country head that I have sanctioned an additional amount of $250,000 for Thailand for the custodial services project. So that was amazing, because not only did I have customers who were waiting, I had a budget where I could spend money. And so I came back quite enthused. And that was the start of the custodial services story in Thailand. So as you can see, there was some planning, going and talking with the customers, and a little bit of luck that Dennis Martin happened to meet me, and I didn't have to go through an elaborate process to try and get a budget approved for this project. So that's all for this session. The story will continue. Thank you very much for listening to